The warm steam from the shower had completely fogged up the bathroom mirror when I heard the door open behind me. For a brief moment, I thought I had forgotten to lock it, but then a familiar voice drifted through the mist. "Ethan, sorry, I left my toothbrush in here." It was Adrian. My heart skipped in a way I couldn't quite explain. "My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a residential security systems technician. It's a job that keeps me moving constantly, checking sensors, installing cameras, adjusting alarms, yet it often leaves me feeling strangely isolated. I've always been a quiet observer, someone who analyzes before acting, who prefers order over impulse. Maybe that's why my last relationship lasted 4 years without ever deepening. Mia and I separated about 8 months ago. There wasn't any dramatic fight. We simply realized we were living parallel lives. Since then, I've been existing in my small, carefully organized apartment on the edge of Seattle. Everything has its place. Every routine has its time. It's a peaceful life, predictable, tidy, but sometimes it feels too quiet, like I'm waiting for something undefined. That's when Adrian invited me to spend the weekend at his cabin in Northern Oregon. Adrian Brooks is 36, a friend from college, the kind of man who radiates calm confidence without trying. After a mutual divorce 2 years ago, he sold his house in the city and moved into a secluded property surrounded by pine trees. "I needed space to breathe," he once said. We had reconnected a few months after my breakup, meeting for drinks or long talks that always seemed to last until closing time. There was something about him, an ease in the silence between us, a sense that words were optional. When I arrived at his cabin on Friday afternoon, the sun was sliding through the trees, painting the wooden porch in gold. Adrian greeted me with a grin and handed me a cold beer. He was dressed in a soft gray flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, and his hair looked effortlessly tousled, as if the wind had styled it. There was a serenity about him that I hadn't noticed before, maybe the kind that only comes after losing everything and starting over. We spent that evening catching up on life. Adrian talked about his consulting work and the simplicity of living close to nature. I shared stories from my job, the paranoid businessman who wanted cameras everywhere, even in the bathroom, and the elderly lady convinced someone was stealing her cookies. We laughed until our sides hurt. Then, as the sun dipped behind the hills, he opened a bottle of red wine and we cooked together steaks, salad, nothing fancy. Our movements in the kitchen were strangely synchronized. When our hands brushed reaching for the same knife, a small spark shot through me. Adrian noticed. I could tell by the brief pause, the half smile that never reached his lips. Dinner stretched into the night. Candlelight flickered against the wooden walls, shadows dancing between us. He told me he'd grown to enjoy solitude, but sometimes missed sharing small, wordless moments with someone who understood. I told him I knew exactly what that felt like, the quiet victories, the empty apartment, the echo of things left unsaid. Later, we sat in front of the fireplace. Even though it was summer, the mountain air carried a cool edge. At first, we sat apart, the distance polite and deliberate. But slowly, without meaning to, that distance disappeared. When Adrian looked at me, his eyes steady, his tone low and sincere, he said, "You're one of the few people I can truly trust." The words hung between us, heavier than the silence. There was something in the way he said it, not just gratitude, but recognition. And in that moment, I realized this weekend might change more than I had expected. The night slipped away faster than either of us realized, and by the time we finally went to bed, it was well past midnight. Adrian showed me the guest room, a small, warm space with a soft double bed and a window that framed the tall pines outside. He mentioned that the upstairs bathroom was shared, but that he usually used the half bath downstairs in the morning so I could have privacy. When I woke up, sunlight filtered gently through the curtains, and the soft chorus of birds replaced the usual urban hum of my apartment. It was a different kind of morning, quiet, grounded, alive. I went downstairs and found Adrian already in the kitchen making coffee. He was wearing a simple white t-shirt and gray shorts, and for the first time, I noticed how fit he actually was. "Sleep well?" he asked, handing me a steaming mug. "Better than in weeks," I said, inhaling the rich aroma. I'd forgotten how healing silence can be. We drank our coffee on the porch, watching the mist dissolve between the trees. Adrian mentioned that he had a few house projects he'd been putting off and asked if I'd mind helping out. Of course, I agreed. After all, working in residential systems had given me plenty of experience with tools and repairs. The first task was the kitchen faucet, which had been dripping endlessly. Adrian said he'd tried fixing it several times but couldn't figure out the cause. I slid under the sink with a flashlight while he handed me tools, crouched beside me, illuminating the spots I pointed to. The space was tight, and several times our arms brushed accidentally, or maybe not so accidentally. When he passed me a wrench, our fingers touched and lingered a moment longer than necessary. "Can you see what's wrong?" he asked softly, his voice closer than I expected. I turned my head toward him and realized our faces were just inches apart. For a second, time froze. I could feel the warmth of his breath on my skin. "I think I found it," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady as my heart raced. I tightened the loose connection and the leak stopped instantly. Adrian smiled, genuinely impressed. "You're incredible, Ethan. I don't know how to thank you." There was something in the way he said my name that sent a shiver down my spine. I tried to ignore it, blaming the strange rush on proximity and the quiet intimacy of the house. The next project was the garage, a large, cluttered space filled with boxes, tools, and forgotten equipment. We spent the afternoon sorting through the chaos. Adrian, surprisingly methodical when focused, organized items by category, while I checked the condition of the power tools and cables. We quickly fell into an easy rhythm, working together as if we'd done it for years. At one point, while lifting a heavy metal shelf, we found ourselves face to face again, breathing in sync. The eye contact held longer this time. I noticed details I'd never paid attention to before: the faint lines near his eyes when he smiled, the exact shade of gray-green in his irises, a small freckle on his neck. "Watch your fingers," he murmured, voice low, almost intimate. Later, we sat on the porch again, sipping cold beers, admiring our work. The garage looked spotless, everything in perfect order. Adrian leaned back in his chair and smiled. "It's been a while since I felt this accomplished," he said. "It's amazing how different it feels to share these small wins with someone." I nodded, understanding completely. It wasn't about the faucet or the garage, it was about connection, the quiet satisfaction of being seen and understood. Our conversation drifted to deeper things. Adrian admitted that his peaceful life in the woods was sometimes just a polite word for loneliness. There were days he went without speaking to anyone, communicating only by email with clients. I could relate. My own work, silent homes, blinking lights, long drives often left me feeling isolated too. "Sometimes," he said, gazing at the tree line, "I wonder if I chose solitude out of necessity or out of fear." "Fear of what?" I asked. He hesitated. "Of being disappointed again, of expecting too much, of finding out I'm not as interesting as people think." His honesty caught me off guard. I saw in him a reflection of myself, someone who had loved carefully, lost quietly, and built walls disguised as independence. "You know that's not true, right?" I said. "You're one of the most genuinely interesting people I know." He looked at me, eyes searching. There was gratitude there, but also something else, something unspoken, heavy with meaning. "Thank you, Ethan," he said quietly. "That means more than you think." Before I could respond, a delivery van pulled up with supplies for the house. The spell broke, but the air between us had changed thicker, charged with awareness. As we carried boxes inside, I found myself noticing things I hadn't before. The way his laughter came easily when something amused him, how his forearms flexed when he lifted a crate, how the sunlight made the edges of his hair glow. It was as if a lens had shifted, bringing him into sharper focus. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees, the air between us felt different. It wasn't just friendship anymore. It was something unnamed, fragile, quietly magnetic. Neither of us spoke about it, but we didn't have to. Every glance, every pause, every silence said enough. And deep down, I knew that whatever was unfolding between us had only just begun. The heat from the showers still lingered in the air that night, wrapping the cabin in a quiet, tender stillness. Saturday evening had arrived like a sigh after a long day of shared work and laughter. The air between us felt different now, softer, closer, charged with something unspoken. Adrian suggested we make something special for dinner. To celebrate a productive day, he said with that easy smile of his, we decided on grilled salmon with asparagus and lemon butter. He took care of the fish while I prepared the vegetables. The kitchen filled with the scent of herbs, olive oil, and slow jazz playing faintly from the radio. We worked in an almost wordless rhythm, our movements unconsciously aligned. Sometimes he'd ask for my opinion on the seasoning, or I'd ask if the asparagus was ready. Between these small exchanges, the silence felt comfortable, warm even. Maybe it was the golden hue of the late sun spilling through the window, or maybe it was the faint music that made the kitchen feel smaller, more intimate. Adrian had changed into a navy blue shirt that somehow made his eyes look brighter. I caught myself noticing things I usually wouldn't, the way his sleeves rolled neatly to his elbows, the way his voice softened when he spoke. Our hands brushed several times when we both reached for the salt, when he passed me a cutting board, when we adjusted the oven temperature together. Each touch lasted just a heartbeat too long. My pulse noticed even if my mind pretended not to. "How about we open that bottle of wine in the cellar?" Adrian suggested, drying his hands on a towel. "The one you said you were saving for a special occasion?" I asked. "Exactly. And I think tonight qualifies," he said with a grin. He disappeared downstairs and returned with a dark bottle that looked aged and expensive. "Bought this in Napa last year," he said, carefully opening it. Never found the right moment to open it until now. So, I'm the special occasion, I joked, till my voice came out quieter than intended. Adrian stopped mid-motion and met my eyes. You've always been special, Nathan. Maybe I just never said it properly. For a moment, the air thickened. My heart skipped, unsure if I'd imagined the weight behind his words. But he turned back to the wine, acting as though he hadn't said anything unusual. We ate at the dining table, candles flickering between us. The soft light painted his face in golden shadow, and suddenly it didn't feel like dinner between friends anymore. The wine was incredible, smooth, deep, a little dangerous. As the bottle emptied, our words grew slower, more deliberate. Adrian began speaking about his marriage, something he had only ever mentioned in fragments. He said that his ex-wife had been kind, patient, but that something essential had always been missing. It wasn't her fault, he murmured, swirling the wine in his glass. We were two good people trying to force chemistry that never existed. You can share a bed for years and still feel completely alone. His words hit me deeper than I expected. I thought of Emma, my ex, and how our relationship had been exactly that. Peaceful, polite, and utterly hollow. Sometimes I wonder if I'd even recognize real chemistry if it stared me in the face, I admitted. Maybe I've been so focused on compatibility that I forgot what attraction feels like. Adrian looked at me, his eyes steady. You'd know, he said quietly. When it's real, it's impossible to miss. Something shifted inside me. The air felt charged. My heart beat uneven. I tried to tell myself it was just the wine or the intimacy of the setting, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. After dinner, we moved to the living room. Adrian lit the fireplace and changed the music to a softer jazz playlist. The flames cast slow-moving shadows on the walls as we sat on the couch, closer than we needed to be. The conversation became slower, punctuated by long silences and glances that said more than words. He spoke about how his views on relationships had changed since his divorce. I'm done pretending to be who people expect, he said. Now I just want something real, even if it doesn't fit the script. Then he looked at me and asked, have you ever questioned the truths you've built your life around? I frowned. What do you mean? Like, we assume certain things about ourselves, what we want, who we love, because of what we've experienced. But what if we've never actually experienced what truly moves us? The question lingered. I could tell he wasn't speaking abstractly. My chest tightened, a strange mix of curiosity and fear. Maybe, I said finally. After my breakup, I started questioning everything I thought I knew about myself. Adrian nodded, his expression unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he spoke so softly, I almost missed it. Nathan, you know you mean more to me than just friendship, right? The words hung between us like electricity. My heart pounded. I couldn't speak. Part of me had known all along, but hearing it out loud changed everything. Adrian, I began, but the words vanished. He looked down, suddenly flustered. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. I don't want things to get weird. No, I interrupted, louder than I intended. Don't apologize. I'm just processing. We sat in silence for a moment that felt eternal. I could see the vulnerability in his eyes, raw and unguarded. Something inside me softened. Without thinking, I shifted closer. He didn't move, just watched me, steady and calm. When I stopped, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him, I whispered, I never thought about it that way. But now that you've said it, maybe I've always known there was something different between us. 3. Adrian reached out and brushed his fingers along my jawline, his touch trembling slightly. I closed my eyes and leaned into his hand. When I opened them again, his gaze was searching mine. Can I? He whispered. I didn't answer. I just moved closer. Our lips met softly at first, cautious, questioning, then deepened, as though years of unspoken emotion had finally found their voice. It wasn't just a kiss. It was the recognition of something that had been quietly forming for years. A connection that felt both brand new and ancient at once. The taste of wine lingered between us, warm and intoxicating. But beneath it was something far more powerful, truth, finally spoken without words. Our hands began to move with a tenderness that carried more emotion than desire, as if each touch was a quiet confession neither of us had ever dared to speak aloud. When Adrian whispered my name against my lips, something deep within me shifted. It was as though a door I never knew existed suddenly opened, and behind it was a flood of warmth, longing, and recognition. We drew closer on the couch, our bodies fitting together as though they had been meant to all along. Adrian's fingers tangled gently in my hair, while my lips traced the edge of his jaw and the curve of his neck. Every movement felt electric, not from urgency, but from connection. The firelight danced across the walls, wrapping us in a soft, flickering glow as the outside world faded away. For a moment, there was no past, no future, only the quiet heartbeat of two people rediscovering something ancient and new at once. He reached behind him, pulled the blanket from the back of the couch, and covered us both. The air beneath it felt sacred, like our own little world. His fingertips moved slowly over my skin, tracing invisible lines that seemed to write promises neither of us could yet name. "I've thought about this before," he whispered near my ear, his voice trembling slightly. "But I never believed you'd feel the same." "Me neither," I confessed, surprised by my own honesty. "I think there's always been something, I just never let myself see it." We stayed like that, exploring this new space between us, not in haste, but with care. Each breath matched the other, each kiss a patient rediscovery. It wasn't about passion alone, it was about recognition, the realization that what we'd found wasn't random, but inevitable. Then, suddenly, my phone vibrated on the coffee table. The sound cut through our fragile cocoon like a blade. I tried to ignore it, but the vibration came again and again. "You should probably check it," Adrian said softly, though I could tell he didn't want me to. Reluctantly, I reached for it. A message from Emma, the woman I had started seeing a few weeks before this trip, flashed on the screen. We weren't serious, barely even beginning, but the sight of her name was enough to jolt me back into reality. "Emma's asking about our plans for when I get back," I murmured, glancing at Adrian. I saw something shift in his expression. Not hurt, just quiet understanding, the kind that comes from someone who knows life rarely unfolds neatly. "Hey," he said gently, placing a hand on my shoulder, "it's okay, we don't have to figure everything out tonight." But the spell had broken. The intensity between us softened into something quieter, still warm, still real, but laced now with awareness. I leaned back slightly, unsure what to say. "Adrian, I don't know how to handle this," I admitted. "What happened was incredible, but also confusing. I've never felt anything like it before." "I know," he said simply, "and it's okay to be confused. You don't have to have the answers yet." The rest of the night unfolded in a softer rhythm. We talked in low voices, sharing pieces of ourselves we had never said aloud, fears, regrets, hopes we barely understood. The intimacy between us didn't vanish, it just transformed. Touches became gentle gestures of reassurance rather than desire. His calm presence steadied me. Before we said goodnight, Adrian looked at me and said, "I just want you to know no matter what happens, you're still one of the most important people in my life. That hasn't changed." His words settled deep in my chest. There was a sincerity in him that made me feel safe, even as my world spun with questions I couldn't yet answer. When we finally went to bed, it was long past midnight. We met in the hallway and exchanged a hug that lingered not with passion, but with quiet affection. It was the kind of embrace that said, "Whatever this is, I'll hold it gently." Lying awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, I replayed every moment. My thoughts tangled between disbelief and wonder. Something fundamental had shifted inside me and between us, and there was no going back. Morning came softly. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, painting the room in gold. The night before felt like a dream, and yet the memory of his touch was too vivid to dismiss. I went downstairs and found Adrian already awake, pouring coffee. There was a tension in the air, not heavy, but charged with meaning. He smiled when he saw me. "Morning? Sleep well?" "Eventually," I replied, accepting the cup he offered. "You?" "About the same," he said, chuckling faintly. We sat at the table, drinking in silence. It wasn't uncomfortable, just full of things unsaid. Finally he spoke. "Nathan, about last night." "I know," I said quickly. "I've been thinking about it all night. I don't regret it. It was real. But I need time to understand what it means." He nodded as if he'd expected exactly that. "I understand completely. There's no pressure. Our friendship comes first." His calm acceptance only deepened my confusion. How could someone handle something so intense with such grace? We spent the morning cleaning up the cabin, neither of us saying much. The silence felt heavier now, touched by melancholy. When I packed my things, Adrian helped, folding my clothes carefully, his presence steady and kind. At one point, when our hands brushed, a spark of last night returned, brief but undeniable. "Adrian," I said softly, "thank you for being patient with all this." He smiled faintly. "It's not patience, Nathan. It's discovery. And discoveries take time." When it was finally time to leave, we stood on the porch for a long moment, watching the forest breathe around us. The world felt still, suspended. I knew I was stepping into something unknown, a new landscape of feeling and identity I hadn't expected to face. "Will we keep in touch?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Adrian looked at me with that steady, unflinching calm I had come to know so well. "Of course we will," he said quietly. "Some connections don't fade, they just change form." And as I drove away, his words stayed with me, echoing softly, like the last notes of a song that would never quite end. "Always," Adrian said without hesitation, "no matter what happens, you're one of the most important people in my life." We hugged goodbye, a long, quiet embrace filled with warmth, but also uncertainty about what lay ahead. When we finally pulled apart, I saw the same mix of hope and apprehension reflected in his eyes that I was feeling in my own chest. The drive back to Seattle was one of the most introspective of my life. As the pine trees blurred past the car windows, it felt as though I was leaving behind more than just a weekend. I was leaving behind an old version of myself. Somewhere in the stillness of Adrian's cabin, I had uncovered parts of my heart I hadn't known existed. That realization was both liberating and terrifying. In the weeks that followed, we kept in touch regularly. Adrian completely respected my need for time and space, never once pushing for definitions or clarity before I was ready. Our phone calls and text messages carried the same gentle warmth as before, yet beneath them ran an undercurrent, a quiet awareness that something deeper had awakened between us. I tried to continue dating Emma, the woman I'd been seeing briefly before that weekend, but everything felt hollow by comparison. Our conversation skimmed the surface, our laughter felt rehearsed, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't recreate the effortless depth I'd shared with Adrian. It wasn't fair to her, and eventually I had to face that truth. One night, about 3 weeks later, Adrian called. His voice was calm as always. "How are you handling everything?" he asked. "Still processing," I admitted honestly. "But one thing I've learned is that I can't pretend it didn't happen. That night meant something real." There was a pause on the line, soft but full. "And what are you going to do with that discovery?" he asked. "I don't know yet," I said after a moment. "But I know I need to be honest with myself about what I feel and about what I feel for you." He didn't answer right away, but I could hear the faint smile in his silence. "There's no rush, Nathan," he said gently. "I'll be here when you're ready to find out what it really means." Later that week, as I drove home after another long day of work, I caught myself replaying his words. That weekend hadn't just changed how I saw him, it had changed how I saw connection itself. Adrian had shown me a kind of closeness that wasn't bound by definition, not simply romantic or physical, but something more honest, more human. I realized then that my journey wasn't just about exploring what I felt for him, but about rediscovering parts of myself that had been dormant for too long. He had been the spark, the mirror that reflected back a side of me I hadn't dared to look at before. It was the beginning of a deeper transformation, one that went far beyond either of us. If you've ever had a moment that made you question everything you thought you knew about yourself, you'll understand how powerful that realization can be. Because sometimes the most profound awakenings come from the most unexpected places. A weekend, a conversation, a single look that changes everything. And as for Adrian and me, our story was far from over. What came after was even more revealing than that first night, a journey of discovery, courage, and truth that would redefine not just our friendship, but the very meaning of love itself.